Hello whisky fans and welcome back. Good morning, good afternoon and good evening. Whatever time it is where you are, it's dram time. I don't necessarily promote drinking whisky for breakfast, but if it's only a small amount and you haven't got to drive, if it's your day off maybe. So it is the 16th of December today and it's time for door number 16. Which hopefully will be another good one. Smells good. Smells very whiskey-ish. Definitely a strong barley spirit. Distilled barley note to this one. Very cereally. As for the colour, pleased to say that it looks a bit paler than a lot of the ones that we've had recently. So Smoky, I've got all the half consumed ones on the desk in front of me. Smoky Scot was very pale, not as pale as that. Bunnahabhain 12, we know that's a natural colour whisky and significantly paler than that. Definitely a full-bodied, hearty single malt, this one. Lots of gristiness, lots of really nice cereal notes. So lots of washback, fermenting grains. Very appley, and it's a strong, appley, full-bodied apple note and apple peel as well. But it's not all just sweet and pleasant, it's got a little bit of a bite to it as well. I think that hard edge, slight hard mineral note blends in really well with that gristiness and the barley notes and that sort of slightly tannic apple peel note as well. So that's a really good nose, promising start. As for the palate though, haven't tasted this yet, but a little bit concerned because it's not unusual to find a lot of whiskies of this style that are very nice on the nose and they're perhaps bottled at 40-43% and they haven't got the palate to back it up. Hopefully that's not going to be the case with this one. I've no reason to think that. It definitely is nice and full-bodied on the nose, but it's not unheard of for that appley, Speyside, fruity style to be bottled with a substandard presentation. Because it does smell a lot like a Speyside whisky, and it has to be said that the Speyside region, they are I think they are still the largest region of Scottish whisky, but they are lacking behind when it comes to craft presentations. So let's get around to tasting this one and see if this is one of the good ones or one of the not so good ones. It's a good one. Very creamy and buttery. Again, lots of appley notes, appley barley spirit, appley maltiness. But very buttery, slightly oily, creamy. A little bit of a creamy vanilla caramel note. Really good body, really good texture. A little bit of it's like the nose and palate on this one is like buttered apples with caramel, which is as good as it sounds. Very, very apple driven. I would guess that this is a 46% whisky, and I would guess that it's probably natural colour. It looks how you would expect a whisky that has this flavour profile to look. It kind of reminds me of a lot of underwhelming Speyside whiskies, but if they were made properly. So it has that classic Speyside profile, and by that I essentially mean that it's quite Glenfiddich-ish. It's got that sweet but slightly gentle, malty, appley profile that you get from a lot of the Speyside classics. So Glenfiddich really has it, and Glenlivet, all of those classic Speyside distilleries that we're all really familiar with. But this is absolutely not a Glenfiddich. I think if you told me this was a Glenfiddich, but bottled, like a Glenfiddich 12, but bottled at 46%, I would not be surprised. I would believe you. But the reason why I know that this is not a Glenfiddich is because you look at the other things available from Glenfiddich. It's not the 15. For a start, I know this isn't 40%. It's a better presentation than that. So it's not the 15 or the 18. And they have wildly different profiles anyway. It's closest to that Glenfiddich 12 profile. But the only thing that you can really get from Glenfiddich, which is a proper presentation without paying hundreds and hundreds per bottle, would be the Glenfiddich 15 Distillery Edition, which this is pretty close to. But I think it's got a little bit more oily body to it. And I don't think that this is 50% or 51% or whatever that Glenfiddich is. The reason why I'm shaking my head is because I've just realised that this one's going to be another one which is an absolute bastard to fit into the leaderboard. It's going to be high though. This is the Kingsbarns 6-year-old sherry cask. Lots of obvious sherry influence on this one, spicy fruitiness, dried fruit, nuts. Quite chocolatey as well. Really good sherry from Kingsbarns on that one. And the Murray McDavid Tullibardine. Not a million miles away from that Kingsbarns in style or quality. Then you're down to the Distel 3, the Bunnahabhain, Deanston, Ledaig. Bunnahabhain 12. A much more fresh profile on today's Dram, whatever it is. Really does remind me of that. I really like it, that sort of classic profile that you get in Glenfiddich 12. Sharp, sweet, appley, but better presented. I think it's between this today's Dram and the Kingsbarns. I'm starting to kind of wonder if I'm going crazy here, because it seems like every time I get a new Dram in this calendar, they're, apart from 2 or 3 sitting at the bottom of the leaderboard, they're all really good. And every time I get a new one, it seems like it goes in at like number 2 or 3. But I think that is going to be another number 2. Again, like I've been saying with all of these, Smoky Scot. How the hell do you rate that against all of these light and fruity, either sherried or very fruit driven distillate? How do you score that against this ballsy little 5-year-old Islay from Caol? Very difficult. I'd say that the quality, like I've said before, the quality from the Smoky Scot and today's Dram and the Kingsbarns, the Tullibardine and the Distel 3 is all very much of a muchness. And I think that the order of that top 7 or so is really down to preference, which is why, perhaps slightly controversially, I've got that 5-year-old Caol at the top of the leaderboard. Possibly one of the cheapest whiskies that we've had in the calendar so far, apart from that Tamnavulin probably. And maybe the Jura 12, although that's more expensive than you'd think it is. But yeah, Smoky Scot punching above its weight at the top of the leaderboard. And there is definitely an element of personal preference in there with me putting it at the top of the leaderboard, because I really like punchy, very heavily peated young Islay Scotch, especially Caol. But yeah, today's Dram, I think, is going to go in between the Smoky Scot and the Kingsbarns. So what have we got? Craigellachie. So this is the standard expression from Craigellachie. Craigellachie 13-year-old. Craigellachie being a little bit unusual there, I'm going for a 13-year-old age statement for their standard expression. And I think it's 46%. Yeah, 46%. And I haven't reviewed Craigellachie 13 yet, but I will do. I've got a bottle of it and I do really like it. I think it's non-chill filtered, but I think they possibly add a little bit of colour, or sometimes, I can't remember. But I'm not surprised that I like that so much, because Craigellachie is a fantastic distillery. The 13 and the 17 and all of their special releases, really good whiskey, and as I suspected, I'm not surprised that I picked up on that classic high Speyside profile, like the Glenfiddich profile, because I do think that there's a lot of crossover between Craigellachie and Glenfiddich, but Craigellachie obviously is proper whiskey made at a proper ABV, which mostly isn't what we get from Glenfiddich. So yeah, fantastic little whiskey. Glad and pleased to have put that in at the number 2 spot. And in my humble opinion, I do think that Craigellachie is probably the shining example of Speyside whiskey. Fantastic dram. It's a style that I really enjoy when we get it at this good presentation. And I think it's going to be a hard one to beat. Join me tomorrow when we find out if anything can beat it. Cheers.